I've seen some things in my time, things that would make a grown man cry, but nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to what I encountered that night in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. I'm a former Navy SEAL, served my country for a good part of my life, seen war, seen death, seen the worst of humanity. But this was different. I was on a mission, a private one. A friend of mine, a local, had been complaining about strange happenings around his property. Livestock disappearing, strange noises at night, the works. I figured it was probably a bear or a cougar, but he insisted it was something else. He'd lived in these parts all his life, and he swore up and down that he'd never seen or heard anything like it. The first night I was there, I set up camp near the edge of his property, where most of the disturbances had been reported. It was a clear night, the stars shining bright above the towering pines. I'd always had a connection to this area, having spent many summers here as a kid. The forests, the mountains, they were a part of me. But that night, they felt different, unsettling. I was about to turn in when I heard it. A strange clicking noise, like two stones being tapped together. It was coming from the tree line, just out of sight. I grabbed my flashlight and my sidearm and I moved towards the sound. And then I saw it. It was crouched low to the ground, moving on all fours. It was pale, so pale it almost glowed in the moonlight. Its body was gaunt, like it hadn't eaten in weeks. But its face was something out of a nightmare. Large black eyes that seemed to absorb the light, a gaping mouth that looked like a void, and no nose. Just smooth, pale skin. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I'd faced down enemy combatants, stared death in the face, but this creature, it terrified me. It moved with a speed and agility that was unnatural, darting between the trees with a grace that belied its horrifying appearance. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off it. It watched me, its black eyes never leaving mine. I could hear the strange clicking noise again, louder now. It was coming from the creature. I retreated back to my camp, my mind racing. What was this thing? Where did it come from? And more importantly, what did it want? I spent the rest of the night awake, my eyes trained on the tree line. The creature didn't show itself again, but I could hear the clicking, a constant reminder of its presence. The next day, I started my investigation in earnest. I needed to know more about this creature, about what was happening in these woods. I had a feeling that this was just the beginning, that there was more to this story than I could see, and I was determined to find out what it was. Over the next few days, I started digging deeper. I talked to the locals, asked them if they had seen or heard anything strange. Most of them brushed me off, said it was just the wildlife or the wind. But a few of them had stories. Stories of strange creatures in the woods, of livestock disappearing, of eerie noises in the night. One old man, a lifelong resident of the area, told me about the pale ones. According to him, they'd been around for as long as he could remember. They were creatures of the forest, he said, not meant to be seen by human eyes. He told me to leave them be, to let the forest have its secrets. But I couldn't do that, not after what I'd seen. I spent my nights watching the tree line, waiting for the creature to show itself again. And every night, like clockwork, I'd hear the clicking. It was like it was taunting me, reminding me of its presence. But it never showed itself, never stepped out of the shadows. I started to question myself, started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing. But then I'd hear the clicking, and I'd remember those black eyes, that gaping mouth. I knew I hadn't imagined it. I knew it was real. One night, about a week after my first encounter, I decided to venture deeper into the forest. I needed to find it, needed to confront it. I packed my gear and set off, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of leaves under my boots. I moved slowly, my senses on high alert. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, could feel the unease settling in my stomach. And then, there it was. The clicking. It was louder now, closer. I turned my flashlight towards the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. And there, in the beam of light, I saw it. The creature. The pale one. It was watching me, its black eyes reflecting the light. It was on all fours, its body low to the ground. It was still for a moment, and then it moved. It was fast, faster than anything I'd ever seen. It darted between the trees, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, frozen, as the silence of the forest closed in around me. The urge to follow was strong, but something held me back. A primal instinct, a warning from deep within. I knew then that I was not meant to follow, not meant to uncover the secrets of this creature. I turned back, retracing my steps through the forest. The clicking had stopped. The forest was silent once again. But the silence was different now. It was a respectful silence, a mutual understanding between me and the creature. I made it back to my camp just as the sun was rising. I packed up my gear, my mind racing. I had seen it, had seen the pale one. I had ventured into its territory, had heard its eerie clicking. I knew then that I couldn't stay, couldn't continue my investigation. I had seen too much, had gone too far. I left that morning, left the forest and the pale ones behind. But I can still hear the clicking, can still see those black eyes in my dreams. I know they're still out there, in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. All right, here we go. I am not one to get spooked easily. Maybe that's just me being full of myself, but it's the truth. Being in the military kind of grounds you, you know? Shows you what you're made of. Teaches you when to be scared and when not to be. About a month back, I definitely had a good reason to be scared. Unless I was just hallucinating the whole dang day, I can't make heads or tails of what I saw. I've been fishing every season since I hung up my military boots. That's a decade now. Bass, catfish, trout. I've caught them all. And I eat what I catch. I am not a trophy fisherman. You probably wouldn't even know I was a fisherman if you just dropped by my place on a lazy afternoon. I don't keep fishing magazines on the coffee table. My tackle box is stashed away in the garage, out of sight and out of reach. I don't talk about fishing. It's my alone time. Out there, away from the hustle and bustle with a fishing rod in my hands, it's kind of soothing. Usually. About a month ago, that peace and quiet went out the window. I had recently moved my fishing spot from its usual place in the Florida Keys. I set it up about 20 miles towards the mainland, in the Florida swamps. I just wanted a change of scenery. Looking back, that might not have been the best idea because something found me out there. Despite all the camouflage and concealment, something picked up my scent and came right for me. It was hunting me like a gator on a duck. I was sitting in my little boat, all cozy and unprepared. It probably thought I was an easy meal. If I'd been any less lucky that day, I probably would have been eaten. I didn't hear it coming. That's a bit embarrassing, but I didn't. I only saw it when it emerged from the swamp and slithered into the clearing. It was huge. At first I thought it was an alligator, but its scales were too long, too thick and wild. When I aimed my fishing spear in its direction, I saw the beast for what it was. A snake, I think. A snake larger than any creature I've seen in North America. It was looking right at me. It was looking at me and hissing. Hungry, I could tell. I was shocked. I was appropriately afraid. My fishing spear was not the kind of weapon designed to take out creatures of that size. It kept coming toward the boat. I gripped my spear tighter, just in case I'd have to jab to keep the beast moving. The base of my boat was a few feet off the water. When that thing got close and reared up, its head was level with the edge of the boat. I jabbed it, and it didn't flinch. It hissed and thrashed, almost annoyed, and it attacked the boat itself. It could have slithered up there, I bet. It could have joined me in the boat and had me cornered. I don't know why it didn't. Maybe it was just toying with me. Maybe I ticked it off and it wanted to tick me off right back. It tore through the boat in seconds. The next thing I knew, the entire boat was capsizing. I fell into the water and went tumbling with it. I hit the water hard, lost my breath. Most of the boat collapsed right on top of the snake or the gator or whatever the heck it was. To this day, I still don't know what it was. Luckily, the weight of the boat knocked it down, disoriented it. The bottle of fish attractant I had with me busted open. The scent must have hit that animal like a whirlwind. It thrashed at the splintered remains of the boat and gave me just enough time to swim. I made it to the shore with my spear in hand. I knew I couldn't outswim it. It was only a matter of time before it picked up my scent again. I turned around and used a tree to steady my aim. I was still pretty shaken from the fall. I waited. I held my breath and I waited, not moving. I watched the snake thing rake its tail through the water, searching for the source of the enticing odor. When its tail came up empty, it started to look around again. I watched as it reared up again and realized a horrifying truth. Its body sat just as naturally upright as it did on all fours. It didn't struggle to hold its balance at all. It spotted me again. It hissed, and it slithered toward me, this time moving on the surface of the water. Luck found me again at that moment. If the snake hadn't reared up, I would have been aiming at its back and its tail. On its hind end, though, I could get to its underbelly. I could get to somewhere important. When I jabbed this time, it hissed. I screamed with every ounce of air in my lungs. I screamed until I was empty. It must have been enough. I watched the snake turn around and flee in the other direction. I waited again. I knew I had to. I had to make sure that it wasn't circling around me, trying to approach from the flank. It took me hours to make it back to my truck. Every sound and movement put me on edge. I don't scare easy. I didn't used to anyway. The more time that passes between that encounter and now, the more I want to know what that animal was. I'll tell you one thing, though. I'm not willing to go back to get those answers. I'm built for a lot of things, but fishing that creature is not one of them. At least I can take my fishing rod anywhere else in the world. That monster thing, it can have the Florida swamps. I'm a regular guy just like you. I work as a park ranger in the Appalachian Mountains. It's a peaceful job most of the time. But this past winter, things got a bit weird. So I'm out there in the mountains, right? It's the off-season, not many folks around. My buddy, let's call him Joe, and I are out there doing our usual cleanup. We're trying to get everything tidied up before a big snow that was about to hit. Now there's this creek that runs through the area. People love to hang out there, but they leave a mess. So Joe and I are walking along the creek, picking up trash. Suddenly Joe spots something. He's got a keen eye for animal tracks, and he's found some that don't belong. There are these hoof prints, big ones, leading up to the creek and then back into the woods. But here's the kicker. They're bipedal. Like, whatever made these tracks was walking on two legs. Weird, right? So we decide to follow the tracks. They lead us into the forest, and it's clear this thing is heavy. The tracks are deep, and they're headed southeast. We're about 20 minutes into our trek when we catch a whiff of something foul. Smells like rotten eggs. We keep going and the smell gets stronger. The tracks lead us to this old hollowed-out tree. The smell is unbearable now. Joe checks out the tree and pulls out this thing. It's like a skin, but it's covered in scales. It's big, too. Like human-sized. We're both freaked out at this point. We radio the other rangers, tell them what we found, and hightail it out of there. When we get back, the other rangers are full of questions. We show them the skin, and they're just as baffled as we are. The head ranger tells us to steer clear of that area for a while. Fast forward a few weeks. We've all been away because of the snow. When we get back, the first thing we do is check out the area where we found the skin. Nothing. No tracks, no skin, no weird smells. But over the next few months, we keep finding these pieces of scaled skin. They're smaller than the first one, but they have that same rotten egg smell. And then last week, Joe found more of those bipedal hoof prints near a campsite. I don't know what's going on, but it's got me worried. Whatever this thing is, it's been keeping a low profile, but I'm not sure how long that'll last. A couple of weeks after Joe found those tracks, I was out on patrol. It was late. The sun was setting, and I was about to call it a day. I was walking along the creek, just enjoying the quiet, when I heard a rustling in the bushes. I turned around, and there it was. This creature standing on two legs just a few yards away from me. I froze, not sure what to do. It was big, bigger than any man I've ever seen. It had to be at least 7 feet tall. Its body was covered in scales, just like the skin we found. They were a dark green color, almost black. The scales were rough and jagged, like they could cut you if you touched them. It had a long, thick tail that swished back and forth slowly. Its legs were muscular and ended in hooves, just like the tracks we found. But its upper body, that's where things got really weird. It had arms, long and muscular, with hands that ended in sharp claws. And its face, it was almost human, but not quite. It had a long snout with sharp teeth that glinted in the fading sunlight. Its eyes were a piercing yellow, and they were fixed on me. I stood there, frozen in fear as it watched me. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching me with those yellow eyes. I don't know how long we stood there, staring at each other. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. Then, without warning, it turned and disappeared into the forest. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I had just seen. Then I turned and ran back to the ranger station. I told the other rangers what I saw, and they were just as shocked as I was. We decided to keep a closer eye on the area and to warn any visitors to be careful. I don't know what that creature is or where it came from, but I do know one thing. It's out there, in the Appalachian Mountains, and I have a feeling it's not going anywhere anytime soon. My name is Mike, by the way. I'm a city boy, born and raised in New York. But I got this wild idea back in the 80s to visit California, specifically the Redwood National Park. No one else was ever available to join me, so I figured, why not take a solo trip? So off I headed in June of 1988. So I'm there, in the heart of the park, surrounded by these towering trees. I'm walking along this trail, completely lost in the beauty of it all. But before I know it, the sun's starting to set and I'm nowhere near the main trail. I try to backtrack, but everything looks the same in the dimming light. I'm starting to panic a bit, but I try to keep my cool. Then, out of nowhere, I spot this figure up ahead. It's small, like a kid, but there's something off about it. It's got this long, slender neck that seems to stretch on forever. Its skin is pale, almost luminescent in the fading light, and it's covered in these strange, scaly patches. And its eyes, man, they're this deep, unsettling red. They're staring right at me, and I swear it feels like they're looking into my soul. Despite the fear creeping up my spine, I decide to follow it. I'm desperate, and I figure maybe this thing can help me find my way back. I follow it for a bit, and it keeps stopping quickly to look back at me like it wants me to follow it. But then, out of nowhere, the ground just disappears from under me. I'm falling, and it feels like it's happening in slow motion. I land hard, and when I open my eyes, I'm in this dark cave. And I'm not alone. There are these things staring at me. They look like skulls, but they're moving, like they're alive, and they're all around me, watching me. I'm terrified, but I can't move, can't scream. And then everything goes black. When I wake up, I'm back in the forest, not far from the main trail. I have no idea how I got there, but I don't stick around to figure it out. I hightail it out of there, swearing all along that I'll never set foot in a forest again. I mean, I was shaken. Who wouldn't be? I had just had the most terrifying experience of my life, but I was also confused. What was that creature that wanted me to follow it? And those skull-like things, were they real? Or was I just hallucinating? I needed to get out of the forest, away from the trees. I needed to be around people, even if I didn't feel like talking. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning in my hotel room, unable to shake the image of those red eyes and the eerie glow of the cave. The next day, I decided to do some research on the area, so I went to the local library and started looking up local legends and folklore. I figured maybe there was some sort of explanation for what I had seen. I spent hours poring over old books and newspaper articles, but I couldn't find anything that matched my experience. Feeling defeated, I decided to head back to the hotel. But as I was leaving the library, I noticed a small, dusty book on an end cap with other titles about the area. The title was barely legible, but I could make out the words, Redwood Mysteries. I opened the book and started flipping through the pages. Most of it was just old tales of gold miners and lumberjacks. But then I came across a chapter titled, The Guardians of the Forest. It told a story of ancient beings that were said to protect the forest and its inhabitants. They were described as having long necks, scaly skin, and deep red eyes. My heart started pounding as I read the description. It was eerily similar to the creature I had seen. The story went on to say that these beings were rarely seen by humans, but when they were, it was usually a sign of a major change or event. I didn't know what to make of it. Was it just a coincidence? Or had I really encountered one of these guardians of the forest? And if I had, what did it mean? What was this major change the book was talking about? I spent the rest of my trip trying to find answers, but I never got anywhere with it. In the end, I returned to New York with more questions than I had when I left. But one thing was for sure. My trip to California was one I would never forget. I've been a park ranger at the Yosemite National Park for the past decade. It's been a good gig. Lots of the usual stuff: guiding tours, maintaining trails, dealing with lost hikers. You know, the typical ranger stuff. But lately, some things have been happening that are anything but typical. It all started with this one incident. I was on my usual patrol route when I got a call in the early evening about a disturbance near Half Dome. I was already in the area, so I responded. When I got there, I found a woman in her mid-30s looking terrified and pointing at the sky. Now Yosemite is a place of natural beauty. It's peaceful. It's well-maintained. But what she was pointing at was something I'd never seen before. She claimed she'd seen a UFO. At first, I thought she was just seeing things. Maybe she was dehydrated or had altitude sickness. But then I saw it too. A strange light in the sky, moving in ways that didn't make sense. But it gets weirder. As I was trying to calm her down and figure out what was going on, the light suddenly shot towards us. It was so fast it was just a blur, and then it was gone. I reported the incident, but it was dismissed as a possible drone or some kind of optical illusion. I didn't think much of it after that. A few weeks went by without any unusual incidents, and I thought maybe it was all over. But then, it happened again and again. Each time, the light seemed to get closer and more intense. I don't mind telling you that it was starting to freak me out. The higher-ups started to worry about the safety of the hikers. Yosemite is a vast place with plenty of wilderness and remote areas. The park started increasing patrols in the area, but nothing seemed to deter the strange light. Then, almost exactly 2 weeks after the last sighting, another incident. This time, the light didn't just appear and disappear. It stayed, hovering in the sky above the Half Dome. It was so bright it lit up the entire area. I couldn't make out what it was, but it was definitely not a drone or a plane. The light was so bright it was almost blinding. I had to shield my eyes with my hand just to look at it. It was pulsating like a heartbeat, and it was making a low humming sound that I could feel in my chest. I radioed in the situation, but all I got was static. I tried again, but it was the same. It was like the light was interfering with the signal. I was alone, with a strange light hovering above me. I won't lie, I was scared. I decided to head back to the ranger station, but as I turned to leave, the light moved. It shot across the sky, leaving a trail of light behind it, and then it was gone. Just like that. I stood there, staring at the empty sky, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. But there was no logical explanation. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen or heard of before. The next day, I again reported the incident to my superiors. They were still skeptical, but they couldn't ignore the fact that something strange was happening in the park. They decided to bring in some experts to investigate. For the next few weeks, the park was swarming with scientists. They set up equipment and camped out, hoping to catch a glimpse of the strange light. But it never appeared. It was like it knew we were watching and decided to lay low. Just when we thought it was over, it happened again. This time, it wasn't just a light. It was a full-blown UFO. It was hovering above Half Dome just like before, but this time it was closer. It was so close, I could make out details. It was round and metallic, with lights all around it. It was silent, except for that low hum that I could feel in my bones. As I stood there staring at the UFO, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was like I was meant to be there, like this was my destiny. I know it sounds crazy, but that's how I felt. Then, without warning, the UFO shot up into the sky and disappeared. It was so fast, it was just a blur of light. And then, it was gone, just like that. I stood there staring at the empty sky for what felt like an eternity. I was in awe, but also a little disappointed. I had so many questions, but I knew I would never get the answers. The next day, the park was buzzing with excitement. Everyone wanted to know what had happened, but I couldn't tell them. I couldn't put into words what I'd experienced. It was something you had to see to believe. In the weeks that followed, the sightings stopped. The scientists packed up their equipment and left, and the UFO enthusiasts moved on to the next hotspot. Life in the park went back to normal, but I was changed. I had seen something extraordinary, something otherworldly. I knew that we were not alone in the universe. And so, I continue my work as a park ranger, guiding tours and maintaining trails. But every night I look up at the sky and wonder if they'll come back, if I'll ever see that strange light again.